From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Anne-Marie Hordern, I'm Joe Matthew. Inflation seems to cool, but the latest Fed minutes predict a mild recession later this year and a slow recovery to follow. We'll hear the response from the White House.
And a Bloomberg exclusive, Vladimir Putin personally approved the arrest of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich.
And another contender moving closer to jumping into the race for the Republican nomination for president.
That's why I'm announcing my exploratory committee for president of the United States.
We'll discuss the state of the race ahead with our political panel. Anne-Marie, it just gets slowly bigger, but still unclear how many people are going to be on that debate stage this summer.
Is it me, or is this a new trend? Everyone is pre-announcing. I plan on at some point filing the paperwork.
You know, we talked to Asa
yet.
Hutchinson about that yesterday. He's been doing interviews as a presidential candidate and is still weeks away from an announcement. I think we kind of know how this is going to end.
And the current president, how many times has he said, I plan on running? His wife said he plans on running.
Yes,
his former chief of staff, Ron Klain, said he's running.
So we're in the age of the non-announcement.
I plan on running, yeah, but I'm just not filing the paperwork.
Just put a video on Twitter. You'll get all of us talking. Of course, we'll get to that a bit later on. Joining us around the table today, Bloomberg's Kate Davidson and national security reporter Nick Wadhams on this CPI day. Welcome to both of you, with data showing prices moderating slightly in March, but not enough to likely move the Fed from hiking rates further. Then again, Kate, we got minutes from the last Fed meeting today predicting a mild recession later on this year. Is that actually what the Fed is aiming for?
Yeah, they were certainly interesting minutes. You know, sometimes they're very backward looking, but that was pretty surprising seeing that in there, right? The Fed staff forecasting that, you know, if the bank turmoil essentially gets worse, that we would see a recession later in the year. And that might take a couple of years to recover. But it's important to point out that's not what Fed officials themselves were projecting. But if you look at the projections that officials submitted in March, they have to put new forecasts in quarterly, and we get them every few meetings. They basically suggested that they do see the economy slowing a lot. That's because if you look at what happened in the first quarter, growth was a lot stronger than expected. So if you were to just look at their forecast from December to March, they look like they didn't change that much, but a lot has changed with growth. Things were a lot stronger in the first quarter. So I think that perhaps it's not that far off from what Fed officials are anticipating, but none of them have said it quite so explicitly as we saw in the minutes.
In the minutes, Kevin Kreis did the word tally crunch for us. 23 times, quote, banking sector was in the minutes. Is that the new data dependent, how we used to think it should have been? It was CPI over the past few months. It's now, well, it depends on the credit, depends on the banking sector.
Oh, for sure. I mean, clearly they're still keeping a very close eye on the inflation data because their mandate is stable prices, right? So they're looking at that. But I think, you know, as they think about how much further to raise rates and whether to hike in May or whether to pause, they're looking very carefully at this credit data because it's still just very unclear how the, you know, the bank turmoil will filter through to the rest of the economy. It looks like there are some signs that credit, there's been some pullback, there's been some tightening, but it's not clear yet that there's a wider credit crunch, which is, of course, what would, you know, slow the economy more. You know, if there's some pullback, that might actually help them a little bit in their efforts to cool inflation, but the magnitude is so uncertain.
We did hear from the White House on this today. Heather Boucher, member of President Biden's Council of Economic Advisors, had this to say about the CPI.
Prices are slowing. And, you know, certainly that also means we have seen months now, about 9 months since last June, of real wage gains for workers across the economy, even though the labor market has been, as it continues to create jobs, has been doing so at a slower pace. So it feels like we are getting back to the kind of economy we need to see with that strong and steady, but yet stable pace of growth.
So this is kind of more of what we've been hearing from the White House for months, actually, right? I mean, how do you get your talking points around such a stubborn situation?
Yeah, steady, stable growth is what how they're describing a slowdown, really. I mean, things are slowing down, and that's what the Fed wants to a certain extent. I mean, the minutes reiterated again today that they still see an imbalance between supply and demand, and so they want to see perhaps the labor market cool off a little bit more. They want to see wage gains cool off a little bit more. But you know, it's very hard to calibrate these things. Again, if there is a credit continues to be a credit pullback, it's hard for it to just cool down just enough for the Fed to engineer the soft landing, which we kind of stopped talking about for a little while. And I feel like the idea is back because the economy is very resilient, but it's just a tricky thing to pull off.
Just one more here quickly before we get to a lot of other issues going on in the world. Lael Brainerd today, there's good reason to think the situation has stabilized. Is there a disconnect from what Treasury and the White House think? I think of what Yellen has said. I think of what Brainerd is saying. And what the Fed is coming out saying?
Well, I think that Fed officials, most of them have been pretty confident that they're kind of past the worst of it, right? That there was another shoe to drop, that there was some kind of wider contagion or panic that could happen. That doesn't mean there might not be further bank failures. And again, it doesn't mean that this could affect the broader economy in terms of credit conditions and some sort of pullback there. But I think that they also feel pretty much like their efforts to stem that contagion have largely worked. But we get data every week on this. And again, that's another key metric that they're looking at.
And I wonder, Anne-Marie, whether it's a soft or a hard landing, the closer we get to that, we could find further splits.
How difficult for this White House with the Fed coming out and saying we expect a mild recession. If they're saying that, come on.
It's going to be hard to keep everybody on the same page here.
And also, Kristalina Georgieva of the IMF is sounding a very different alarm than the one or picture Janet Yellen and Lael Brainerd are trying to project.
We need to get everybody in the same room here, I think. We also need to acknowledge another important story today, and it was a breaker exclusive from Bloomberg here. Russian President Vladimir Putin personally approving the arrest of this Wall Street Journal reporter who's been in quarantine now for weeks. Nick, this is an important revelation. Then again, would this have ever happened without his sign-off?
Extremely unlikely, because this just changes the rules of the game so much. I mean, it's really hard to underscore how much arresting a foreign journalist in Russia. I mean, this isn't something that's happened since the Cold War, and it's essentially sent a massive chill through the journalist community. There are very, very few foreign reporters in Russia anymore, and I mean, it's just the way it's completely upended the way that journalists do work in a country like Russia. It's almost impossible to overstate how serious it is.
Nick, I want to get your take on what we heard from Antony Blinken yesterday, speaking on Evan Gershkovich and his case right now in Moscow. Take a listen.
Russia not following through on meeting its obligations to consular access. Never mind the practice of detaining people arbitrarily for political purposes is going to do even more damage to Russia's standing around the world, standing that has been in free fall, particularly since its reinvasion of Ukraine last year.
Blinken saying Russia's standing been in free fall, but clearly Putin taking in this U.S. journalist from the Wall Street Journal, he's sending a message to the White House, and this is now going to be a political pawn. Is there a sense of what Russia wants to gain from this, who they potentially would want as an exchange?
Well, there is an alleged intelligence agent being held in Brazil, for example, and the timing of Evan Gershkovich's arrest was staggering. I mean, literally, a day or so after the announcement of a DOJ indictment against this alleged intel agent, he was taken. So, we have seen swaps in the past. It is really extraordinary, too, what Secretary Blinken said there. I mean, they have still not gotten consular access. So what more sign do you need directly to the administration that Russia is going to play really hardball in this one? I mean, they're not even letting diplomats go see him, which is in complete violation of all sort of international conventions that they've signed up on prisoner, situations like this.
It's really incredible stuff, and it's happening at the same time as the Pentagon tries to get the bottom of this classified document leak. A lot of it contains information about Ukraine's defenses, and there seems to be a great concern, if we believe what's in these documents, among Pentagon officials about Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
Yeah, I mean, another unprecedented situation. There are two things about this one that really strike me. One is this is live information. So this isn't leaks that have been disclosed, of situations that had happened months or even years before. I mean, this is information giving the Pentagon's most recent assessment of what it thinks the situation is in Ukraine. The other thing that people may not realize is when you look at these documents, these aren't scans that are appearing online. These are photographs of documents that were presumably briefed to senior Pentagon officials. So what it looks like, which is incredibly embarrassing, is that someone literally took these things out of a trash can or something, put them in a they had been folded, unfolded them, put them in their pocket, left the Pentagon and photographed them, and then put them out, in some cases, weeks before U.S. officials even knew they were out there. So the reckoning that is going to happen around this thing is, I mean, we are only at the beginning of it.
Yeah, only at the beginning, and it's incredibly embarrassing to the U.S. credibility and also to U.S. allies. Nick, thank you so much for that. Our thanks to our roundtable today, Bloomberg's Kate Davidson and also national security reporter Nick Wadhams. We're going to continue that conversation, much more on the intelligence breach from the Pentagon.
Very seriously. And we will continue to work closely with our outstanding allies and partners, and nothing will ever stop us from keeping America secure.
We'll speak with former CIA Director Leon Panetta. That's next on Balance of Power, right here on Bloomberg. Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. The United States says it will turn over every rock to find out how classified documents about allies and adversaries ended up online. For more, we welcome Leon Panetta, former director of the CIA and, of course, former Secretary of Defense. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much. What an incredible insight. You can potentially help us understand what's going on right now. We just spoke to our National Security Advisor, Nick Wadhams, who points out that these are hard copies of these documents. They have fold marks in them. Someone would have had taken them out. How difficult is it going to be to assess who is responsible for leaking this intelligence information online?
Well, look, there's no question that it's difficult to assess just how much damage has been done without knowing the how and the when and the who that were behind this breach of information. I think it's enough to say at this point that any leak of highly classified information does damage to our national security. It does damage particularly to our sources, those who help collect this information who are now vulnerable. It does damage to our credibility and our reputation, particularly with our allies. And because it's timely information, it's up-to-date information about, an analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of the Russians and the Ukrainians. It's going to impact on military decisions that need to be made within these next few weeks. So there is damage here. We ought to be concerned about it. I'm concerned that, frankly, the FBI and the Pentagon have not been able to determine the exact source of this breach. We need to plug this leak because if there's more out there, it could be even further damaging to our security.
Well, we know it's not going to come easily here. The man who has the job you once held, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, talked about this yesterday in a briefing about the leaks. Let's listen.
Well, they were somewhere in the web, and where exactly and who had access at that point. We don't know. We simply don't know at this point. I will tell you that we take this very seriously, and we will continue to investigate and turn over every rock until we find the source of this and the extent of it.
Somewhere in the web, he says, Mr. Secretary, it's been suggested in our own reporting on this that this may be just the tip of the iceberg, that sites on the dark web are actually a supermarket for classified U.S. intelligence. Is that true?
Well, there's no question this was on a social media site called Discord. It was out there for a month before somebody figured it out that this was highly classified information. This is a reflection of the web and the capability of individuals to be able to exchange and get at this kind of information remains, in my consideration, a very significant threat to our ability to hold classified information. After all, this is secret information. It's top secret information. It should be secure, but obviously it's not. And that should be a real concern to our military and political leaders.
Well, the concern that I'm curious about, and you would have information in terms of your time at the Pentagon, did you receive briefings like this where there was this type of paper? And don't these papers then go into a burn bag? Is it conceivable that someone took them out of the burn bag and walked out of the building with it?
Yeah, I mean, normally there are procedures that control this kind of classified information. It is presented, but then it is secured immediately after it's presented. And as you said, it's put into a burn bag, and there is no, just simply tossing it into a paper wastebasket of some kind. So there are procedures. They're very strict. They have to be followed. And the fact that this happened and that somebody in the Pentagon is responsible for this happening raises a very serious concern about the security of classified information at this point in time.
I'd love to ask you, Mr. Secretary, about what we have at least seen so far as the contents of these documents and very revealing real-time information about vulnerabilities on the front line in Ukraine as they prepare for a springtime offensive that really may be just about to begin. As you take a look at the contents of these documents, how worried are you about the situation that Ukraine is in now?
Well, there's no question that it's cause for concern. I mean, a lot of this, was out there in the open press in terms of concerns about just exactly whether or not they had the air defense systems they needed, whether they have the weapons that they need. But I think it's really important for Ukraine to keep its eye on the target. They have absolutely, within these next few weeks, have to commence a strong offensive against the Russians and push them out of the Donbass. And if necessary, go at them in Crimea as well. The only way we're going to be able to conclude this war is if we force Putin either to admit defeat and withdraw, or ultimately to decide he's got to negotiate some kind of settlement. The only way you do that is by force, and hopefully the Ukrainians, who are the best fighters we've seen for a long time, hopefully they can put together that kind of offensive that can result in not only defeating Russia, but protecting their democracy.
Secretary, we reported today in a scoop that Putin personally approved the arrest of Evan Gershkovich. What should the U.S. response be to this? How are they going to get this reporter back to the United States?
Yeah, for those of us that have had to follow Putin's activities, this is not a surprise. Putin is in a box right now. He's in a corner. Obviously, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening to his country. And he's going to resort to every old tactic he's used. And one of those tactics is to arrest people, hold them, and hope that you can ultimately exchange that individual for somebody that you need. And that's what's going on here. He's not going to allow contact. He's going to hold this individual tightly, and he's then going to look for opportunities to ultimately provide that kind of exchange. It's reprehensible. It's not right. It's another indication that Putin has reached a point where, frankly, he's going to resort to anything he can right now in order to maintain some kind of credibility with the Russian people. That's what this is really about.
Always valuable insights from the former director of the CIA, former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta. We thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
Looking ahead, there are good reasons to think that policy may have to tighten more to bring inflation down. But there are also good reasons to think that the economy may continue to slow, even without additional policy adjustments.
San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly speaking earlier after the CPI data show moderation, we'll call it, in inflation in March. And the Fed's latest minutes reveal they see a mild recession coming later on this year. Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons is here with more on this. How do we have both?
Well, that's a really good question. In some sense, to get inflation down, you have to have the economy slow down. It's just a question of how much. And we did see that inflation is coming down. Core inflation, 0.4% month on month in March. And when you look at some of the components, it could be good news, especially politically for the Biden administration, when you actually had grocery prices dropping for the first time since 2020, the slowest monthly advance in about a year for key housing cost measures. Energy as well had the slowest advance in about 9 years. But remember, we're trying to get down to 2%. So the journey's one thing. The destination is something else entirely. And the market is betting the Fed still probably has a little bit more work to do. Right now, traders pricing in one more hike as more likely for May, but then they think the Fed's going to turn around and start cutting by about 70 basis points right now by the end of the year. And this is where the credit conditions question really comes in, something that was addressed in those Fed minutes. They talked about the uncertainty around how much really credit conditions are going to tighten. That's kind of what's going to dictate their path forward. We're already seeing it in the Fed's own data. Bank lending at the end of March dropped by a record. And when I say record, we're talking going all the way back to 1973.
Yeah, it seems like the banking sector is the new data point that everyone is, quote unquote, data dependent. But Kayleigh, what you hear from Lael Brainerd and we hear from Janet Yellen is that they say the financial sector is sound, it's resilient, but the Fed is concerned.
Yeah, well, and not just the Fed, the IMF as well. I mean, monetary and economic authorities around the world are still talking about a certain level of stability question here when it comes to the banking system. But of course, when you're affiliated with the White House, what you likely are trying to project is calm, because you don't want a crisis that it seems like we may have gotten through for now to potentially be exacerbated because you spell out some kind of panic or concern.
All this as crude oil hits the highest level of the year.
Yeah, gas prices are actually going up.
So what's that going to mean this summer in this conversation?
Very good question.
Peak driving season, and gas prices are already going up, and Biden has yet to announce. But I wonder if this is a moment where they look back, and the Treasury Secretary is when inflation transitory, and then she apologized. That could be a similar moment with the banking sector.
Save your pennies for this summer.
Our thanks to Kayleigh Lyons. Coming up, more on Biden's toughest ever car pollution proposal.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that EPA is proposing the strongest ever federal pollution technology standards for both cars and trucks. Together, today's actions will accelerate our ongoing transition to a clean vehicles future, tackle the climate crisis head on, and improve air quality for communities all across the country.
EPA Administrator Michael Regan earlier today at an event in Detroit, joining us to talk about President Biden's car pollution proposal that we introduced you to first yesterday is John Bozzella, President and CEO for the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. It's great to have you with us here. We're thinking big thoughts here, the toughest ever curbs on vehicle emissions being proposed today by the Biden administration. It's a pretty basic first question. Is this plan feasible? Can you pull it off?
Yeah, the short answer is it depends. This is nothing short of a complete transformation of the automotive industrial base, and the entire auto market has to change. Automakers are already investing. You're seeing product leadership and product momentum, 91 different models in the marketplace today. So we know how to make the vehicles. The success of this regulation is going to depend on things outside the vehicle. Do we have charging infrastructure? Where are the raw materials coming from? And are they producing affordable vehicles? These are big questions that we have to work through during this rulemaking period.
And there's a lot of nuance in that. Where are the raw materials coming? Where are they being processed? If you want access to the Inflation Reduction Act money, which a lot is being pushed towards EVs, you need to not rely on foreign countries, i.e. China. But China dominates this market. So how do U.S. companies do this and not rely on batteries coming out of China?
Yes, this is a really important question that you're asking. It is true that China dominates EV supply chains right now. If we want to control our own destiny here in the United States, and we want to make sure that we remain a cutting-edge automotive industry, we've got to invest in those supply chains now. And we've got to figure out how to mine and process raw materials here. It's a big undertaking. By the way, I agree with that policy goal. We should control our own destiny, and we shouldn't rely on China for EV supply chains.
We spoke yesterday with the White House climate advisor, Ali Zaidi, who was speaking very optimistically about this. Let's listen to how he put it.
The core goal has to be boosting our energy security, making this stuff here in America, and reducing our emissions. We're relentlessly focused on reducing our emissions, but not going to be picking technology winners and losers.
Okay, so we won't try to pick winners and losers here either, but how about the consumer? Is the consumer going to be a loser here? Because these are still very expensive vehicles. And the critics say that the White House is trying to create some sort of artificial economy to support them.
Yeah. So, you know, it is true. The average transaction price of an electric vehicle is much higher than a conventional vehicle today. About $66,000 a vehicle, average transaction price today against a typical vehicle, which is about $44,000 or $45,000. So that price has to come down. Now, it will over time. Why? We'll have more models in the marketplace. There'll be more affordable segments represented among those models, and hopefully the EV supply chain will develop. But this is a critical question. If these vehicles aren't affordable, we can't possibly reach the levels of penetration required for battery electric vehicles in this regulation. So we have a lot of work to do. Again, I think we will over time. The question is how quickly.
Yeah, Ford, GM, they've laid out all these goals for EVs to make up 40-50% of new sales by 2030. But do you think the Biden administration, through this new order, is trying to dictate the market?
Yeah, you know what? I think they're trying to balance a couple of things. One is, I do think they feel that and you heard this from Mr. Zaidi, that the Inflation Reduction Act and the incentives that are built into that act are going to have some impact on the market. It's too early to know to what degree there will be an impact. But I do think, as a policy matter, those types of supportive policies are important. I also recognize there does need to be climate regulation. We do need to reduce emissions. Do we have the balance right? Are we moving too quickly? Ultimately, that's going to be determined by these questions. Infrastructure, where is the charging infrastructure? Mr. Zaidi talked about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That was an important down payment on high-speed public electric vehicle charging. But it is not enough. There needs to be more investment, more private sector investment, more engagement. Those actions are what is going to determine whether we get here or not.
It's an area that we've certainly been talking about a lot. Anne-Marie asked you about batteries. In terms of the charging network, the White House finally sits down with Elon Musk to get to this, but we're still a far cry from where they are in China. And what I hear from people is not only cost, but hey, you know, especially if you live in the city, I use my car to drive longer distances, and I don't know where there's a charging station out there. Do I need to put one in my house?
Yeah. You know, and I did put one in my house.
What kind of EV do you have?
And so I get to drive them all. Okay. So it's a hazard of the profession to be able to, test different vehicles. 80% of people who have EVs charge them at home right now. And so that's really where we are today. But we're also at, 8 or 9% of the market. In order to get to 50, 60, 70% of the market, people have to charge outside their homes. They need to charge where they're going. So this is an important piece of the puzzle. I do believe that the bipartisan infrastructure bill was an important step in the right direction. No question about that. But I don't think we're quite on the right track yet with regard to the volumes of chargers required for these volumes of electric vehicles. Will we get there? I think we will, but we'll have to see how quickly we're going to go.
You're not the only one that has a lot of these questions. Obviously, the oil industry has been reacting to these new rules. We spoke to ConocoPhillips chairman and CEO Ryan Lance on Bloomberg. He spoke exclusively to Bloomberg's Alex Steele. Take a listen.
It's a stated goal of the administration to try to move the agenda a bit on the energy transition and speed that up. I don't worry about it from our business side just because I do the math and I do how hard it is. You cannot power our country on renewables alone. And you're going to need fossil fuels, and we're going to need it for a long period of time. Our job in our industry is to do that more sustainably.
John, I'm sure you don't want to weigh too much into the politics, but this is obviously a win for the environmentalists. At the same time, the Biden administration recently allowed Willow to go through. Is this Biden striking a middle ground tone?
Yeah, that's a question for the Biden administration. They get to decide what tone they're striking here.
Or at least are they acknowledging we need all forms of energy?
Oh, I think that's right. And I think based on, to the point made in the segment we just saw from the CEO of ConocoPhillips, we are going to need liquid fuels for some time into the future. There are 284 million internal combustion engine vehicles on the roads today here in the United States. So we believe that one of the things we need to be working on now is reducing the carbon content of liquid fuels. What that would do is improve the emissions performance of vehicles already on the road today. I know this is something that the oil industry is working on. We believe this is a partnership opportunity. But yes, we've got to focus on liquid fuels as well.
Yes, certainly. All right, thank you for your time. That was John Bozzella, President and CEO for the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. And Joe, obviously this story is not going away. You brought up a great point about just the sheer volume of charging stations in China. Yeah. Also the data on EV sales grew 60% in 2022 compared to a year earlier, but China and Europe, they lead the market. And it does feel like the United States is trying to play catch up. That's right. And when you talk to people who really were trying to get their hands on an EV, they can actually afford one. They're sitting on a waiting list right now, and they don't know how long that waiting list is going to last. The Ford Lightning has been an amazing story, but it's a question as to, how does the domestic manufacturer catch up with Tesla? GM has its own story. They've been very quietly building a fleet of EVs, and you wonder if this feels a lot different in a couple of years once they hit the market. And the other question is, if you want to buy an electric vehicle, the first thing people ask is, where can I charge it? Exactly. It's very different, actually. In California, you almost see charging stations everywhere, but also gas is much higher there. So I wonder if there's more of an incentive. Do you need to have as many electric charging stations as we have gas stations? And will they have convenience stores? Well, it depends on how good the battery is. I want to know what they look like in the future. All right, well, that's coming up. More on that. And that's one big step for Tim Scott. That's what we're talking about next, towards a White House run. We'll discuss his chances with our political panel after the break. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
Now, keeping up to date with news from around the world, here's the first word. I'm John Hyland. Ukraine will get 500,000 artillery shells courtesy of South Korea. The South Korean government has agreed to provide the ammunition to the U.S., which will free up American reserves to send shells to Ukraine. The lending process allows South Korea to maintain the principle of not directly providing lethal weapons to Ukrainian forces. Russian security services are trying to recruit Ukrainian refugees traveling to Estonia. According to a new report by the Baltic nation, Ukrainian refugees are regularly interrogated by Russian spy agencies, infiltration camps, and at border points. The report says that spy agencies are using tactics including threats and bribery. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is hoping to reach a deal with junior doctors to resolve a pay dispute and end a series of damaging strikes in the National Health Service. Thousands of doctors began a 4-day walkout on Tuesday, raising concerns about patient safety. The government says the doctors' demands for pay are unreasonable, and Sunak says cutting inflation is the government's priority. A new report blames operator error for a series of National Guard helicopter crashes over the last decade. 28 Guard members have died in these out-of-combat crashes. Congress's watch arm, the Government Accountability Office, looked at nearly 300 of them from 2012 to 2021. It says overconfidence or failing to follow standards led to most of the incidents. It's calling for a database to be set up to track future crashes. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Hyland, and this is Bloomberg.
I will never back down in defense of the conservative values that make America exceptional. And that's why I'm announcing my exploratory committee for President of the United States.
An almost bid. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina launching a presidential exploratory committee signaling his intent to challenge Donald Trump for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. For more, let's bring in Roger Fisk, former aide to President Obama and founder of New Day Strategy, and Lester Munson, principal of BGR Group and former staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So, Lester, tell me, he's going to go out. He can now raise more money, and it's going to ask people, what, would you vote for me? But does this actually gear him up? Do you think he will get into this race?
I think he is going to get in the race. He's a senator. He's got the qualifications. He just moved to the Committee on Foreign Relations, my old stomping grounds, to kind of give himself the chops to be commander-in-chief. I think it's a great move. I think he's going to be a compelling candidate in the primary. We'll see if he can make it all the way to the brass ring, but I think he's going to make a difference in this race.
This video was really something. Highly produced. This is how we do it now. You put a video on Twitter. It starts at Mount Sumter. He's walking around talking about American history, Roger. And he takes aim at Democrats, as you would expect here, suggesting that they are exploiting the issue of race. Listen.
All too often, when they get called out for their failures, they weaponize race to divide us, to hold on to their power. When I fought back against their liberal agenda, they called me a prop, a token, because I disrupt their narrative. I threaten their control.
This was an interesting turn for me in the video. They call me a prop and a token. How is that going to resonate on the campaign trail?
Well, first off, thanks so much for having me. And maybe hats off to the Scott people, because I believe the anniversary of Fort Sumter is today. So maybe that was just chance or very good homework on someone's part. It's interesting in the same piece when he laments a culture of grievance that he also takes the opportunity to ladle out a decent dose of it himself. I really think he's going out there. I don't see kind of the drive or the purpose behind what he's doing. I think he's going to go out and he's going to try to mount kind of a third gear kind of campaign, and then bow out at an appropriate time, and probably endorse the former president with the idea of building goodwill and relationships for somewhere down the road. Which is a completely legitimate exercise.
The DNC came out immediately to talk about this. Is this fearful for them? Are they concerned? Maybe not 2024, but 2028? Is this individual someone they need to start preparing for?
I think anytime you have a young senator that or elected official that somewhat breaks the mold, that he does. But what I found disheartening, I thought he was going to kind of go like the nice lane and go that route. And the first third of that video was very kind of scorched earth, kind of cultural stuff that I really didn't expect him to get into, especially coming out of the box. All of them at some point have to figure out how much footsie they want to play with conspiracy theories and things like that, and that whole culture of like, it's not that I just got a red light, but Bruce Orr is controlling the grid and et cetera, like on and on. But the fact that he would come out there and do that kind of almost as part of his introduction, I found somewhat off character.
How about that? Lester, all the while, no one's talking about Ron DeSantis, and he's on his way to Ohio and New Hampshire. How real is the status of his potential campaign?
I think DeSantis does have a real chance. He's raised a lot of money. He's very popular in his home state. Florida used to be a swing state. It is now as red as any other state in the country. And that is in large part because of Ron DeSantis. He definitely has something that kind of persuades folks in the middle and even some Democrats to support him. And I think it'd be a huge mistake for people to underestimate Ron DeSantis right now. It's true his numbers don't look great nationally against Trump right now, but that's not super material. He needs to be focused on Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, where he's going to have two home state opponents, it looks like, and Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. So this thing's going to get to be real. It's going to be a real fun race, I think.
Just in the past 10 minutes, we also had some news. Ro Khanna saying that Senator Feinstein should be stepping down. A tweet, we need to put the country ahead of personal loyalty. They do not think she can fulfill her duties. Correct?
It's up to the governor of California and the senator herself to really decide that. I should mention I served with Roe in the first Obama administration. I think he's similar to Senator Scott in some ways. He's looking at not necessarily this chapter, but the next chapter. And I think that's him trying to cleave off young voters and kind of continue to build on kind of the Bernie identity that he's carved out for himself.
Pretty remarkable last line on his tweet. Not speaking out undermines our credibility as elected representatives of the people. Coming up, our panelists stay with us as we talk NPR's decision to bail on Twitter and Elon Musk's bombshell BBC interview. It's ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Welcome. National Public Radio, NPR, says it's no longer posting new content to its Twitter accounts, 52 official Twitter accounts. How's that possible? After the social media company dubbed NPR state-affiliated media, they're bailing on Twitter. And here with us again, our panel, Roger Fisk, New Day Strategy, formerly an aide to President Biden. Lester Munson is with us at the table today as well, principal at BGR Group. I'd love to know if anyone here has bailed on Twitter yet, because this is something I'm hearing more people about say, you know, I deleted the app from my phone today, Roger. Did NPR do the right thing in this case? They've got a lot of followers. They were doing a lot of business on Twitter until this all started.
Well, for the record, I went from my 52 accounts down to 50, so that's,
okay,
that's how I'm trying to
Just
put a dent in the
down.
whole situation. You know, it's very interesting. I think it's a mistake on their part because clearly Mr. Musk is very interested in having these kind of cultural discussions, right? And he is just an individual and has a lot less to lose than NPR. But then at the same time, sometimes I go and give people a lot of credit, which could be that this could be extremely calculated on their part. And maybe they've looked at some data that says that Musk doesn't poll well with their traditional donor, and that by picking a fight like this, it actually can matter kind of on the back end in terms of like smaller donations and things like that. So we shall see.
Just as we're talking about this, we have another broadcaster that's bailing on Twitter, PBS. They are joining NPR in quitting Twitter over state-backed. Yeah, closely associated. But do you think this is going to be a trend? Are we going to see more media organizations say, we're going to have to step away?
Would it matter? It's one social media platform. This seems like a tempest in a teapot. I'm not sure this is. I think we're making a lot out of not much. I have 52 Twitter accounts going away. Oh dear. There's a lot more to replace them. I think people want to get into the headlines. I agree with Roger.
Look at that tweet though, Lester. Defund NPR is Elon Musk's reply, knowing they get roughly 1% of their funding from the government. Are we really going to go through the defund Big Bird thing again here? In the campaign trail?
I like NPR just fine. I like PBS. If they really want to avoid this whole state-affiliated thing, stop taking government money. I mean, if it's not that much.
Well, should Elon Musk, SpaceX be taking government money?
Oh, boy.
I don't think he doesn't claim he's not state-affiliated.
Do you think NPR is state-affiliated?
Sorry?
Do you think NPR is state-affiliated?
Well, if they're taking any kind of money from the government, they run that risk. Let's face it. I mean, it's not totally implausible to call them state affiliated. If they don't like that label, don't take the money. Especially if it's 0.1% or 1%, you don't really need it. Say no and move on.
Full disclosure, I used to work for NPR. I think you did
so
too at one time,
yes.
Anne Marie. And there, look, we can get into the whole purpose for having listener-supported radio and all this stuff. I'm just personally, I don't know about you guys, I think I want to get rid of the blue check. This is the other part of this now. Elon Musk says legacy blue checks go away on 420 because it's Elon Musk. But there's a camp of people out there. I think I'm one of them here where I'm not sure I want people to think that I'm paying for the blue check. I think we asked for the blue check to go away now. How about you, Anne Marie?
Yeah, Roger.
Before 420, Roger?
Sure.
Okay, doesn't care.
No, I'm willing to pay for the blue check.
You're going to pay for the blue check.
Well, I don't have one right now. If it's like $8 a month, maybe I'll get myself a blue check.
Don't know who you are.
Yeah, certainly. But I think what we learned is this is actually not going away, though. Whether or not it's media organizations or potentially this
How about
politicians.
the White House on Twitter?
Yeah, exactly. The White House, all of this. When does that become a problem?
Can I just throw out there that I think it's great that there's a little bit of churn in the social media ecosphere, and and this is a market, and people should be able to pick and choose winners and losers.
LinkedIn rising.
Let's see who
Roger
ends
Fisk,
up on
Lester
top.
Munson, thank you so much for joining us. A colorful conversation. More of these stories on the Balance of Power newsletter. We'll see you tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.